And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 2 minutes past 10. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Gunfire has been heard near the government quarter of the Ukrainian capital as Russia's invasion of the country intensifies. It's after residents of Kiev sheltered underground following missile strikes overnight. Ukraine's president called the attacks insidious. Earlier this morning, Prime Minister Boris Johnson told Volodymyr Zelensky the world is united in its horror. It says Russia banned British airlines from landing at its airports or crossing its airspace in the last couple of hours. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told GB News this morning that the UK will support Ukraine.
There is some ray of light and hope for the Ukrainians. Russia failed to get its objectives in the first 24 hours. It had planned a number of cities. It had failed to do that. It lost over 450 personnel of the army. It lost fighter jets and aircraft and helicopters and armoured vehicles. And the world has seen Putin for what he is, and that will, give him a legacy he doesn't want.
Ben Wallace speaking to us earlier. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky said the current sanctions on Russia aren't enough and demanded effective counteraction from its international partners.
This morning, we are alone in defending our country, just like yesterday. The most powerful forces in the world watch from afar. Have yesterday's sanctions persuaded Russia? We see in our skies and feel on the ground that they are not enough.
That is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoken out about the possibility of Russia invading beyond Ukraine.
Is it a possibility that Putin goes beyond Ukraine? Sure, it's a possibility, but there's something very powerful standing in the way of that. That's something we call Article 5 of NATO. That means an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all members of NATO. The President's been very clear that we will defend every inch of NATO territory. I think that's the most powerful deterrent against President Putin going beyond Ukraine.
Well, earlier, GB News spoke to Anna Alboth from Minority Rights Group in Warsaw, who reported that in the last 24 hours, over 5,000 people have crossed the border into Poland.
They are all in shock. It was the first day, so those who came were the ones who packed their stuff the fastest. It's mainly families with kids, with disabled people. They had to spend long hours on the borders. Right now, there is on every border crossing around 10-12 kilometers traffic. But they are full of hope that Poland will help them right now.
Well, Uefa has confirmed that this season's Champions League final will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. Instead, it's been moved to Paris. European football's governing body made the decision to strip the city of its right to stage the match at today's emergency meeting. It follows Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The showpiece event was set to be played at the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg on May the 28th. The date will remain. Rape victims are being continually and systematically failed by the criminal justice system. That's according to a prosecution watchdog. A lack of cooperation between police and prosecutors and poor communication with victims is being blamed for cases taking an average of 2 years to come to trial. 3 former Minneapolis police officers have been convicted of violating 46-year-old George Floyd's civil rights in June 2020. The trio were all charged with failing to provide medical aid when Derek Chauvin held his knee to Mr. Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes. The 46-year-old's murder by police officer Chauvin sparked racial injustice protests around the world. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by a public spending watchdog, despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. Despite confirming 4.7 million vaccines were wasted, the report says the number was much lower than initially expected. It concluded that the operation had been a good use of public money. And car production fell to its lowest January total in 13 years as semiconductor shortages and global supply issues took their toll. Figures from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders show despite an increase in the number of electric vehicles being made, just under 69,000 cars left factories last month, down 20% on the year before. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's over to Patrick and Anaya, and to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Valery Morozov. I'm Patrick Christys on your TV and on your radio. We've got a show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussions that you care about, so here's what's on the menu.
Well, Ukraine's defence ministry confirms Russian operatives have entered Kiev with reports of gunfire near government quarters. We'll be speaking to journalists, army men, foreign affairs officials and more as we bring you the very latest on this escalating crisis. Also as well, just worth noting, as far as we're aware, air raid sirens are going off as well.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council and NATO both plan to meet today. But after Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said his country has been left alone to defend itself, we asked, will the West put troops on the ground?
Before the hour is up, we'll also be speaking to a former Detective Chief Superintendent on the latest from the Metropolitan Police after they accused London Mayor Sadiq Khan of ignoring due process for the ousting of Commissioner Cressida Dick.
Yes, we have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, so make sure that you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
An attack on the people of Ukraine is an attack on all of us. It's an attack on the values that underpin sovereignty, an attack on innocent civilians. It's an attack on humanity. It's an attack on decency. As I speak right now, gunfire can be heard in Kiev and the air raid sirens are blaring. It would appear that at any moment the Ukrainian capital could be immersed into a brutal door-to-door battle. Just think about the men, women and children right now who, a few days ago, may have been about to go to work at an accountancy firm or as a primary school teacher, who are today making makeshift explosives and stocking up on ammunition. There are harrowing images coming out of people huddling together in an underground subway and scenes eerily reminiscent of the Blitz. There are babies being born in bunkers. Their first view of the world will be of their terrified parents seeking shelter from an unhinged tyrant. The first sounds they may hear will be the air raid sirens, the thudding of missiles landing above, and the screaming of terrified innocents. Haunting video footage appears to show men kissing their daughters goodbye, putting them on an evacuation bus and waving them off for what one imagines could well be for the final time. There are videos and audio recordings on brave Ukrainian troops telling a Russian warship to, well, I can't repeat what they said at this time in the morning, but sadly they were then eviscerated by missile fire. The Ukrainian government has removed all restrictions for the military and it's encouraging civilians to make Molotov cocktails as well. This is desperation, and rightly so. Freedom and national independence is hard-earned and must be hard fought for. We are witnessing the desecration of a nation. And the Ukrainian public seem ready for the fight. A brave elderly woman was videoed confronting a Russian soldier, telling him to put sunflower seeds in his pocket so that beautiful flowers will grow in her country when the Russian forces are killed. Former heavyweight world champions Vitaly and Vladimir Klitschko have taken up arms and are ready to die for their country. Sadly, it looks like they may well have to. But it's not just the people of Ukraine who want to resist, no. There are anti-war protests in 40 different Russian cities and calls from members of our government for military leaders in Russia and officials to attempt to topple Putin. If you are religious, then I would urge you to pray for the people of Ukraine, because we stand on the brink of massive civilian casualties and a huge humanitarian crisis. We may well be confronted in the coming days with a moral dilemma. How bad would things have to get before we, and indeed our allies, take more drastic action? Yes, well, I mean, look, obviously it's an absolutely devastating situation that's taking place there at the moment. Shocking footage coming out as well, isn't there?
I mean, it is absolutely terrifying, and it just seems like society, or the world as a whole, seems to be moving from one crisis to another. I mean, we've now, just as we come out of the pandemic in the UK, now we are faced with a possibility of a European war, and I think that is absolutely terrifying. But one of the things that's been really striking to me is some of the new conflicts and disagreements that have emerged within Western societies. We've always had that kind of anti-imperialist stance from the kind of Stop the War coalition, and people like that, and many Labour MPs have been asked some serious questions about why they've signed that. But there's actually been quite a few people on the right, which I found quite striking, who have argued that to some extent this is related to NATO expansionism. And so I do think that this is a horrendous situation, but we need to have some serious conversations in Western societies about how we've allowed things to get to this point where it's almost blindsided many Western leaders that we are now facing a deadly crisis.
I make no mistake as well, you are hearing apparently reports of Putin supposedly going to meet the leader of Pakistan, potentially Iran as well, obviously what's been going on in Afghanistan recently as well, and of course China. Now, if they create their own kind of NATO situation, if they also, let's say China now senses vulnerability and goes after Taiwan, I mean, this could well be the, I was going to say beginning, maybe the seeds were sown a while ago, but certainly the sprouting anyway of some kind of new world order. But
yes, absolutely. And I think that what happened in Afghanistan, the exit that many people regarded as disastrous, was pointed to as the perhaps symbolic end to liberal interventionism, and this idea that, you know, Western leaders have the confidence and moral authority to be able to push back against bad actors on the world stage. But now we are seeing these vulnerabilities exposed quite powerfully, and if the balance of power now shifts in favour of a communist dictatorship in China, then there's huge questions for the future of, you know, the global order.
Yeah, and huge questions as well about the capabilities of Joe Biden. Of course, President Biden, you know, his foreign policy decisions in the past have not exactly covered himself or indeed his nation in glory. Just look at what happened in Afghanistan. And, you know, Putin probably smelt blood, didn't he? But there we go. The latest from Ukraine, then. Well, the Ukrainian Defence Ministry has reported that Russian forces have entered the city of Kiev. Gunfire and explosions have been heard throughout the city as Russian forces close in.
Yes, fighting is mostly centred in the northern district of Obolon, just 9 kilometres north of Kiev's parliament and the city centre. Although gunfire has reportedly already been heard near the government quarter of the Ukrainian capital, the Defence Ministry has called on locals to fight, instructing them to make Molotov cocktails and removing the age restrictions for recruits.
Yeah, well, OK. I mean, I understand that maybe we could get some pictures up at some point soon as well of that. But first, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joins us in the studio. There you are, Mark. Thank you very much. So give us the latest on Russia's attack on Ukraine. Talk us through what's going on, please.
Of moving events on the ground, really, in Ukraine this morning. It was only a few hours ago that President Zelensky was talking about how difficult and tragic the day was yesterday with 137 Ukrainians who were killed. But he said today would be a much more difficult day, a much harder day. And so it would seem that his prediction is coming to pass, because the very latest is that there are reports now, widespread reports coming through, as reported by Reuters and other news agencies, of gunfire being heard in the Ukrainian capital, towards the north of the capital, we understand, about 9 to 10 kilometres from Ukraine itself. So in recent hours as well, there have been reports, again, that Reuters has mentioned, of Russian operatives that have been seen in or close to the Ukrainian capital. We got some pictures out this morning that showed some of the damage from what we're told is missile strikes that hit the Ukrainian capital. There you can see some of the apartment blocks that have been badly damaged. Now, according to the Ukrainians, these were as a result of Russian missile strikes, and they say that they managed to shoot down at least 2 of those Russian missiles. Now, for their part, the Russians are denying that they have launched missile attacks on residential areas of Kiev. But then, of course, it was the Russian government who for weeks now have been denying that they had any plans to invade Ukraine. And that is now what we are seeing, a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, key cities in the east and the north and the south, and of course the capital coming under what looks to be direct attack. We have not seen full-scale fighting in Kiev itself, but clearly, Patrick and I, very, very concerning images that are coming out and reports of gunfire in the Ukrainian capital.
No, Mark, look, thank you very much. Thank you for bringing us the latest on what is, as you rightly said, they're a very fast-moving situation. We will be keeping you up to date throughout the show.
Well, Valery Morozov is a former Kremlin whistleblower and now a Russian analyst who joins us now in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Firstly, I mean, do you think Western countries are doing enough to support Ukraine right now?
No, of course, if you are to take then, say, for example, from the point of Ukraine government, of course it is not enough. More than this, I think the sanctions, actually, they look very strange because they are bringing damages more to economies of the European states, for example, than to Russia. So,
well, Secretary of State Ben Wallace has said that he doesn't want to start a European war. I mean, what do you make of those comments?
No, frankly speaking, I also think that it is not possible now for NATO, say, for example, to compete in the military field with Russia. Putin has managed to create a very strong, sophisticated, modern army using the technologies that have been developed in Soviet times. But at that time, I was a little bit involved in this, though I was against. But there was decision not to go through reforms, but to collapse the economy and state. But actually, it was required because there was tremendous changing, or necessary changing in the military-industrial complex. So that's why, and this has been done. The thing is, you should take into consideration that the Soviet Union that has started this perestroika and all, this is the same process what is going on now, till now.
I mean, what do you think of Putin's timing? I mean, obviously we know from several years ago about the annexation of Crimea, but why do you think now? Why now? Do you think that it's...
No, there are 3 reasons. First reason is international. There is a new alliance between Russia and China, and Russia has backup of China from not so military, because Russia is stronger than China military, but economically, financially, and politically. Second, because NATO has refused to guarantee Putin that Ukraine will not become a NATO state, and there will be no bases. And the third one, because Ukraine is is destroyed economically. It is very poor economically, from economic point of view. It is actually very.
And what do you think about, because some people have accused some people in the West of being apologists for Putin, for essentially pointing to what they describe as NATO expansionism in that region. Do you buy that argument at all?
Yeah, I think it is, at least, from Russian point of view, these are good arguments, because the difference, say, for example, if the bases are opened on Ukraine territory, then the time of the strike is divided by 2.
Yes, indeed. And what's the mood like amongst Russian people, though? Do the Russian people want this?
No, most of the Russian people, they believe that there would be no war between Ukraine and Russia. But at the same time, the thing is that the attitude of Russians towards let's put it, not Ukrainian people, but Ukrainian regime now, is more negative. First, because of radical nationalism as an ideology. Second, the prohibition of Russian language. And third is actually because there were hopes that after 2014, this Maidan, there will be rapid development and democratization, real democratization of Ukraine, and there will be no corruption, and there will be alternative, but to Russia. But actually, Ukraine became a failure from political point of view, from economic point of view, from financial. The level standard of living standard in Ukraine is three times lower than in Russia. So.
Yeah. Do you think that Putin would ever invade a NATO state?
NATO state? Or if there is let us put it like this, danger to Russian existence, yes.
Yeah. Okay, all right, fair enough. Well, look, thank you very, very much for your time, and thank you for taking time to come into the studio and give us your insights there, really. As Valery Morozov there is a former Kremlin whistleblower and now, of course, a Russian analyst who just joined us in the studio. Anyway, after the break, more on Ukraine with former soldier and intelligence officer Mike Tapp. That's after the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. A fine Friday for most of us. Blue skies up and down the country for a good few hours. Most places dry and lighter winds compared to recent days and weeks. That will certainly be a noticeable improvement, with high pressure ridging up from the southwest. Weather front staying clear for the time being, and with these isobars a bit more spaced out across the country, it's looking like a decent day. Initially fairly breezy down the North Sea coast, that wind easing, and then light winds for the vast majority. Some cloud building and one or two showers could develop in the odd place, but for the vast majority it's looking dry, at least until later in the afternoon. Temperatures of 10 Celsius in the south, 8 in the north. Then it clouds over for Scotland and Northern Ireland. A spell of mainly light rain and drizzle crosses Scotland, a few spots there for Northern Ireland as well. And the breeze picks up towards the northwest, with gales for the Western Isles and for perhaps parts of the Northern Isles as well by the end of the night. With a breeze in the north and the west, it stays frost-free, but for, say, the southeastern third of the country, temperatures dipping close to freezing, or in some rural spots down to -1 or -2 Celsius. So a touch of frost to begin things for parts of England, parts of East Wales, first thing tomorrow. Plenty of sunshine, though. We'll keep the sunny skies for much of England, Wales, bright skies as well for southern and eastern Scotland. But the further northwest you are, the thicker the cloud will be, and that cloud giving a few spots of rain for mainly the higher parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland. It'll also be breezy towards the northwest, risk of gales at times for the Western Isles, but that breeze coming up from the south, so relatively mild temperatures in the double figures in most places. Then through Saturday night, a band of rain approaches from the northwest. That will push through during Sunday, weaken, and so for many places, Sunday is another fine day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious.
news is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It is 10:26. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Inayat Valery on GB News. We're live on your TV, radio and online this morning.
Yes, well, UN Rights Office has reports of at least 127 civilian casualties in Ukraine, includes 25 killed and 102 injured, caused by shelling and airstrikes.
Yeah, Ukrainian officials confirm Russian operatives have now entered Kiev. Mike Tapp is going to be joining us shortly, but before that, he's a former soldier and intelligence officer. But before that, we are going to go to a few of your views. Someone's been in touch here asking what this, Jeff, asking, can we hear what the Z is? You might have seen the emblem, the Z, on the back of these Russian vehicles. What it is that actually the Ukrainian military have very similar vehicles, right? So what Putin has done there is what his forces have done anyway. He's painted Z on the back of it. So it is as simple as just an identification thing, that really. Why on earth have the Russians captured Chernobyl nuclear power station? Well, David, there are mixed reports coming out as to exactly what is going on at Chernobyl at the moment. I believe it has fallen, indeed, to the Russian forces, with question marks over the amount of radiation that is now emerging from that area. So we'll obviously have to keep you posted on all of that.
Well, Mike Tapp is a former soldier and intelligence officer and joins us now. Mike, thank you for joining us this morning. What do you make of this worrying situation?
Well, firstly, today for me, and this last period really, has been quite emotional. It's sad to see a democracy under attack from Russia, and we have to think about the civilians that are displaced, that are unsafe, and obviously we're going to see casualties. I have half my family in Estonia, and they are particularly worried. Other NATO nations are worried, and really we're in a dire situation which has come about purely through Russian aggression and Vladimir Putin's refusal to accept a democracy thriving on its border and does not want to see any more NATO nations.
And Mike, I mean, you're a former soldier. I mean, there has been some discussion about possibly putting Western troops on the ground. I mean, it would be incredibly serious for Western troops to be fighting Russian troops. But do you think that possibility should be open, given that Russia is making quite significant incursions into Ukraine?
We have to tread very carefully with this. Any escalation on our part using soldiers in Ukraine, for example, could see this conflict escalate to the point where other NATO nations are at significant risk. So we do need to be very careful with that, and I don't think that should be on the table at the moment. And we must listen to the smaller nations, to the Baltic states, for example, Estonia, Latvia, and any nation that borders Russia. They're the ones that will bear the brunt of this if we do meddle, on the ground with our troops.
Have we lost the advantage, though? Have we taken our eye off the ball for far too long? And actually, in reality, what we've been focusing on is internal microaggressions, potentially, electing a guy in America who doesn't appear to know too much about what day of the week it is, while Russia has been building up and building up and building up, and it's planning the expansion of the Soviet Union, the recreation of the Soviet Union.
No, I think we've had to tread carefully throughout this whole unfortunate situation with our diplomacy. I think what we need is a strong, united NATO. And in general, we've seen that. But, the Germans refusing to to ban the Russians.
What do you make of that, by the way? What do you make of the decision by Germany not to send any kind of military aid whatsoever to Ukraine?
My personal view is that it's weakness, and we must be united and strong, and we must at least enable the Ukrainians to defend themselves. And when it comes to economic sanctions, our values can't be bought. And it's good to see the British government are starting to ramp up. But even now, it's not enough. And we're seeing Labour calling for more. I have little doubt that MI5 will have provided significant pack of oligarchs and influential elite Russians that could be sanctioned, and we need to go ahead with that. There's 30,000 properties owned by the Russian elite. We must go further.
But even do we even have the capabilities to do anything, even if we wanted to? Like not even necessarily putting boots on the ground, but having that kind of military might that would actually put some more fear into Russia. It seems that Russia smells weakness, essentially. I mean, do you think we actually have the military capabilities in the event that there was a conflict that a lot of people felt we needed to actually intervene in?
Unfortunately, the British military has been cut quite significantly, but we can still help, and we are sending more troops to the borders. But the beauty of NATO is it's so strong. We've got the American military, which is the most powerful in the world. So there's no doubt that if needed, NATO could escalate, but we don't want to escalate into that sort of conflict.
Mike, you say that NATO is strong, but only a few years ago, when President Trump was still in office, he was putting pressure on many of the other NATO countries to put more money into it, Germany and France and so on, and many of them didn't want to. It does seem that this horrendous situation has perhaps woken a lot of Western leaders up to the fact that they need to take their role in NATO and their military situation much more seriously than perhaps they were previously.
And I hope to see increases in spending from those nations that were reluctant. It is important that we have a united, strong front from NATO, simply to deter, but also we need to ensure that the borders with Russia don't just deter, but can also defend, because that's what they're there for. And now we're seeing that Putin is unhinged enough to invade a European nation.
Indeed. Well, look, Mike Tapp, thank you very much for joining us. Former soldier, of course, an intelligence officer as well. Just wishing you through his views, really, as the situation continues to escalate in Ukraine. Now, after the break, a former Met Police Detective Chief Superintendent shares his views on the Ukraine invasion. But before that, let's have a quick look at this morning's news.
It's 10:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Gunfire has been heard near the government quarter of the Ukrainian capital as Russia's invasion of the country intensifies. That, as Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says no one's planning to occupy Ukraine. Overnight, residents in Kiev sheltered underground during missile strikes. Earlier this morning, Prime Minister Boris Johnson told President Vladimir Zelensky the world is united in its horror. It's Russia banned British Airlines from landing at its airports or crossing its airspace. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told GB News the UK will stand by Ukraine.
There is some ray of light and hope for the Ukrainians. Russia failed to get its objectives in the first 24 hours. It had planned a number of cities. It had failed to do that. It lost over 450 personnel of the army. It lost fighter jets and aircraft and helicopters and armoured vehicles. And the world has seen Putin for what he is, and that will, give him a legacy he doesn't want.
Uefa's confirmed this season's Champions League final will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. Instead, it's been moved to Paris. The Kremlin's said it regrets the decision by European football's governing body, claiming St. Petersburg would have made a good host. Well, the showpiece event was set to be played at the Gazprom Arena in the Russian city on May the 28th. Here In the UK, rape victims are being continually and systematically failed by the criminal justice system. That's according to a joint report by the Crown Prosecution Service Inspectorate. A lack of cooperation between police and prosecutors and poor communication with victims is being blamed for cases taking an average of 2 years to come to trial. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by a public spending watchdog. That's despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. More at the top of the hour. It's back to Patrick and Anaya and to the point in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Point. Well, earlier this morning, the Secretary of State for Defence, Ben Wallace, appeared on Breakfast with Stephen and Anne to give the latest from the UK's crisis response.
We will respond to this as NATO, 30 countries, a massive alliance, and therefore, if we are required to send troops, to stand up troops for readiness, deploy them to other parts of the world or other parts of Europe, we will do that. And that's why we've already seen in some cases more troops going to Estonia. We've doubled it from a battle group to 2 battle groups at a brigade headquarters. That's nearly 2,000 troops. Last night, our RAF jets did the first policing of the airspace in Romania and in Poland. Ukraine is not in NATO, so it doesn't get the benefit of the mutual self-defence of 30 countries, ranging from Turkey to Portugal to Norway, all able to come to each other's defence. But we can do the next best thing, which is provide them with lethal aid and non-lethal aid, which Britain has, again, been the first at Europe to do so, alongside countries elsewhere. And so we can do that, and that's what we're doing right now. But, fundamentally, President Putin is not thinking rationally. He's got overwhelming forces on the border of Ukraine, well, now in Ukraine, thousands and thousands of troops, 65% of his whole combat forces surrounding and invading one country. That is a real challenge. We'll do everything we can to help them. But, Putin seems set on a course of action that will forever isolate him and lead to huge suffering. But there is some ray of light and hope for the Ukrainians. Russia failed to get its objectives in the first 24 hours. It had planned a number of cities. It had failed to do that. It lost over 450 personnel of the army. It lost fighter jets and aircraft and helicopters and armoured vehicles. And the world has seen Putin for what he is, and that will, give him a legacy he doesn't want.
Yeah, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace there speaking to our breakfast team earlier on today. Now, Ukrainian officials confirm Russian operatives have entered Kiev now. Kevin Hurley was the Detective Chief Superintendent for the Metropolitan Police. However, he also previously served for 43 years in the Army Reserve, touring both Afghanistan and Iraq twice, and completed countless NATO exercises in Europe, including in Poland. And he joins us now. Thank you very much. How concerned are you by the latest news really breaking that the Russian forces, operatives anyway, are now in Kiev? Air raid sirens are blaring across the city as well.
Well, I'm the same as everyone else. Of course, I'm concerned to see innocent people dying, particularly children, and concerned to see the way of life that was moving along quite nicely in Europe so disrupted. But the real problem with this, and this is where I suppose my background in policing comes in, we are dealing with someone who is the head of a great mafia kleptocracy, which is the Russian government, and therefore Putin operates like a mafia don. All of this is quite well planned, quite well considered. Yes, he hasn't quite made his objectives. He will do eventually, or potentially pause if he thinks it's not in his interests. But what I think is behind this is he wants to preserve his position as the head of the kleptocracy by looking as if he's the strong man in Russia. And my goodness me, when we look at the way he intimidated the rest of his war cabinet the other day, that's clearly what he's doing. You know, it didn't look unlike that film out years ago, The Untouchables, with Al Capone in it. We are dealing with a criminal, but with an astute chess player's mind, who really works like a psychopath, doesn't care what the consequences are, and he's called the bluff of all of us. He's just like, I don't know, the kind of bully, the kind of gang boss I might have dealt with in the police, except he's got far more behind him. And interestingly enough, I can say, back in the mid-90s when I was on the Regional Crime Squad, I was involved in investigating one of the first contract killings by Russian gangsters in Woking, whereby they killed an innocent woman by mistake, intending to kill a sister. And that led us to then starting to realise just how much property was being brought up for cash amongst the best areas of Surrey. But sadly, there was no appetite, either politically or within the police, to investigate further where this money was coming from.
You mentioned that Putin effectively runs Russia like a mafia. I mean, but this is something that we've known for a very long time. We know about the assassination of Boris Nemtsov and the controversy around that, but also the poisoning that happened in Salisbury, and also the annexation of Crimea. I mean, why do you think it's taken us so long to really wake up to the fact that this could escalate to such a situation where there's possibly a war in Europe, when we've known for several years now the way in which Russia is being governed?
Well, because North America, the Europeans, Australians are soft and naive. We've lived for far too long off the fat of the land, if you like. We've always been wealthy nations. And as we've gone down the route of democracy, liberation, if you like, of so many different groups, quite rightly, we've taken our eye off the ball that we are here in this wealthy position because in years gone by, and let's be blunt, we went out and took it from African nations, Indian nations, and so on. We only got to be what we might call Great Britain, France, Belgium, Holland, North America, because of what we did in the past, taking other people's property. And now we've taken our eye off the ball, and it's starting to happen here in front of us.
Yeah, and Kevin, on that point, I mean, is there a kind of exhaustion within Western society about knowing what to do? I mean, you mentioned some of the things that have happened in the past. We even know very recently the exit from Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, and so on. Is there just a sense that we don't feel confident to do anything when these situations arise now?
Well, I think there's a bit of that comes in, but I think the other issue with it is, as we look at that military hardware, British military hardware moving along the motorway, people haven't got the appetite to understand that when you use that big chain gun on that warrior at the moment, that they blow people up, it's nasty, and you kill innocent people by mistake. And the problem with it is people don't have the appetite to face up to that in the way in which, well, really, in Europe, the West, we did 70, 80 years ago. People accepted as part of life and part of war that people are going to die. So, You know, we didn't stay the course in Afghanistan. We didn't stay the course in Libya. We didn't stay the course in Iraq. The Americans didn't stay the course in Vietnam. Partly, we made the mistakes in every case in backing a corrupt puppet government, which doesn't help. But I think what it comes down to, we in the West, Western Europeans, North Americans, Australians, New Zealand, are frankly a little bit decadent when it comes to getting in there and doing the hard stuff anymore as nations. That's not to say that these soldiers we're watching right now aren't excellent, because they are. But morally, I don't think we quite have the fibre to deal with it. And we still think Putin's a nice man when he's always been a gangster. And as Folin said there, poisoning people in our own country. What did we really do about it? Not much.
Well, no, that's true. And, you know, you look at some of the richest people in the world, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. Well, they don't have an army and a landmass the size of Putin, do they? And he's probably on a par wealth-wise with them as well. He really is, when it comes to that kind of thing, arguably one of the world's most successful gangsters, isn't he, really, in that sense? What do you make of the fact that the Ukrainian population are now being told to do things like make Molotov cocktails, that they've essentially lowered the age that you can join the army as well? They've lifted age restrictions at the top end of that as well. What do you make of the civilian defence force, as it were, in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, historically, Ukraine, part of the Soviet Union, the older people were steeped in the idea of fighting for the motherland, what was the Soviet Union. I mean, that's what's quite awful and in a way quite interesting about, if you like, almost brothers and sisters from Ukraine and Russia pitched against each other. But the Slavs, the Ukrainians, have always had a history of resisting either the Russian Empire in the past or the Germans. And I think we are going to see some quite bitter counter or insurgent type fighting as this go on. The Russians appear to be, if the Defence Secretary's right, losing 800 people already. That is a big loss. We should remember on the first day of the Iraq War, when Britain and America invaded, we had no more than 30 people killed, and nearly all of those we killed ourselves by shooting each other by mistake or driving helicopters into each other. So the Russians are taking some hits here, and I don't see the Ukrainians as a pushover. Yes, they don't have the sophisticated jets and hardware, but when it comes to holding land and cities, people have got to get in with bayonets and fight. And that means getting out of your armoured fighting vehicles. And the Ukrainians are every bit as good as the Russians, and they will fight back hard, I think, when cornered.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it is going to be down to them, isn't it, really? And I suppose as well, to what extent Vladimir Putin is willing to accept these monstrous civilian casualties. You know, if he starts going around levelling Kiev and hundreds of thousands of civilians die, but actually, I suppose, does he care about that? Do these kind of people, you've dealt with them before, similar-ish people of similar mindsets, gangsters as you called them, do they just write off human life?
Yeah, of course they do. I mean, he did it in Chechnya. He didn't care less about the loss of life in Chechnya, and he didn't care less about the loss of life when he invaded Georgia, or the potential loss of life when he went into Crimea, and his, if you like, agents, probably from Wagner contracting, went into eastern Ukraine. And indeed, Wagner contracting are involved in very, very heavy fighting right now in Syria and in parts of Africa, Mozambique, Central African Republic and so on, where he's using his proxy mercenaries to further Russian aims. You know, the guy is 69. He does not want to end up like Colonel Gaddafi, overthrown and killed by his own people. He wants to keep his money and therefore keep his people busy by finding a nice little war like this. And if you like, indulges his fantasy of rebuilding those parts of the old Soviet Union that he dedicated 20, 30 years of his life to as a KGB agent. I mean, he worked in East Germany and so on as our enemy there.
All right, Kevin, thank you very much for joining us. Kevin Hurley there, of course, who was out of years and years and years, decades of experience in the British Army Reserve. We can show you live pictures now, I understand it, from the Ukraine-Romania border, where, there we are, people are obviously trying to flee, I suppose. People are trying to get out. My understanding was that if you were now of a, quote, fighting age male, as it were, I don't think you're allowed out of the country at the moment, but obviously there we can see some women, can't we?
Well, I mean, similar with their kind of exit from Afghanistan, that may well be the possible next discussion that people are going to be having in terms of refugees and people needing to seek safety in neighbouring countries, and Romania and many of the other countries in Eastern Europe, but also further afield in Western Europe, may well have to reflect upon their responsibility in taking people in this situation.
That's absolutely spot on, and that's something I'd like to ask you, the viewers and the listeners as well, of course, because that's an important thing. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Would you be inclined to take in a raft, a wave of Ukrainian refugees, for example? Would you actually be inclined to do that? Would you be more inclined to do that than you were, for example, when we were pulling out of Afghanistan? Let us know what you think about that. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Let us know your views on all of that. I'm actually going to delve into the inbox right now anyway. But two things frightened me yesterday. This is from Helen. Putin's address, for the first time you could see that he was evil, and Biden's address, where he seemed, and I hate to say it, like a rabbit in the headlights. Terrible situation. That's Helen's view.
But on the point that when we had the Ukrainian whistleblower guests, which were presenting very interesting thoughts, there I do think the timing is very interesting. I do think that, why has Putin chosen now? Has it anything to do with the fragility that many Western countries are in relation to dealing with the kind of pandemic and the exhaustion there? Is it because of Joe Biden and the way in which they have retreated on the international stage, and he feels bolstered and much more confident now to make these kinds of attacks and violations on the rules-based international order? And I think that timing question to me is really important, because why was his behaviour seemingly different a few years ago when President Trump was in office?
Yeah, indeed. Now, Alan's been in touch. The reason why the big countries are worried about stepping in nowadays is because no one wants nuclear war. And that's correct, but it does bring me on to actually a relevant situation that's currently ongoing at Chernobyl. We all know Chernobyl, of course, the defunct nuclear power plant where that horrible disaster took place. Radiation levels around Chernobyl have risen now in the wake of it being seized by the Russian military on Thursday evening. Ukraine's Nuclear Energy Regulatory Agency has now said that higher than usual gamma radiation levels were detected. It's believed this is to do with a disturbance of the topsoil due to the movement of a large amount of heavy military equipment. I don't think I don't want to particularly be in the Russian army anyway, but I wouldn't want to be part of the Russian army that was sent to Chernobyl, would you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, Joan Price has said Putin would never have ordered an attack on Ukraine if Trump was still president. Instead, sadly, we have President Joe Biden and we have a mainstream media who are more interested in continually going on about Partygate and ignoring what Putin is doing. I mean, that has been a common theme in this sense that maybe we have been navel-gazing as a society, focusing on the trivial, the mundane, the kind of culture war subjects, rather than actually more international issues. But, there's another side to that. Some people say that Western leaders often use international issues as a way of deflecting from economic and social and cultural problems here at home and domestically. Yeah. So I do think that there are multiple layers to the conversation.
Well, Andrew's been in touch as well, which is the question that I asked just a couple of moments ago, really, which was about how you would feel about the idea that we may now have to take as a country several Ukrainian refugees, potentially thousands. We just have to wait and see, won't we? And also how you'd feel about that compared to how you felt about the Afghan refugees that there was a big conversation about all those months ago. I would be happy for this country to take thousands of Ukraine refugees, Andrew says. The West are clearly unable to stop this, and Putin will take Ukraine, so I welcome any of their people. That's Andrew's view.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally quite favourable on a personal level of taking in refugees. I do think that if there is any, God forbid, a situation where the UK was suffering, we would hope that our allies and neighbouring countries would do the same. I think that we have to remember our common humanity, and when it is violated in the ways that we are seeing, then we have a moral responsibility to one another as human beings.
Yes, I would take in thousands. I'm happy to take in Hong Kong refugees. John, that's from John. John saying he's more inclined to take those people into his nation than what he says anyway, as in people coming across the channel. Be interesting to see what the distinction for you there is, John, between those people. Obviously you get back in touch and let us know what that is.
Yeah, I'm still showing you footage right now at the Ukrainian-Romanian border right there.
Yeah.
And it is many people perhaps looking to leave quite urgently as the situation is escalating very rapidly.
They keep being told, don't they, now, that basically if you stay, you've got to fight the Russian army and you may well die. If you leave, then you know, you're out, I suppose, for now at least. So people are now being confronted with that most horrendous of choices. There were some videos going around yesterday. Obviously, these videos are all hard to verify these days, aren't they, because of so many things out there on Twitter. But it did look pretty real, I must say, which was a Ukrainian man kissing his daughter goodbye, kissing his wife goodbye, putting them on a bus, and that bus being evacuated while he, reportedly anyway, chose to stay and fight. And it's a really, really tough situation.
Just quickly on that point that you said about some of the footage and whatnot hard to verify. One of the things that has been striking, though, this has actually reminded, I think, many people in the media world about the importance of on-the-ground foreign reporters that do such a fantastic job putting themselves in really dangerous situations. I think that it's skewed over the last few years about many people reporting domestically, but those people that are out there really putting their lives at risk are just incredible.
Indeed. Well, that's it for us now from the first hour of the show. Of course, we've got another one coming your way very, very shortly. We will still be focusing on Ukraine, a couple of other bits and bobs as well. Keep getting in touch with us, ladies and gentlemen. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll see you on the other side.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern. A fine Friday for most of us. Blue skies up and down the country for a good few hours. Most places dry and lighter winds compared to recent days and weeks. That will certainly be a noticeable improvement, with high pressure ridging up from the southwest. Weather front staying clear for the time being, and with these isobars a bit more spaced out across the country, it's looking like a decent day. Initially, fairly breezy down the North Sea coast, that wind easing, and then light winds for the vast majority. Some cloud building, and one or two showers could develop in the odd place. But for the vast majority, it's looking dry, at least until later in the afternoon. Temperatures of 10 Celsius in the south, 8 in the north. Then it clouds over for Scotland and Northern Ireland. A spell of mainly light rain and drizzle crosses Scotland, a few spots there for Northern Ireland as well. And the breeze picks up towards the northwest, with gales for the Western Isles and for perhaps parts of the Northern Isles as well by the end of the night. With a breeze in the north and the west, it stays frost-free, but for, say, the southeastern third of the country, temperatures dipping close to freezing, or in some rural spots down to -1 or -2 Celsius. So a touch of frost to begin things for parts of England, parts of East Wales, first thing tomorrow. Plenty of sunshine, though, and keep the sunny skies for much of England, Wales, bright skies as well for southern and eastern Scotland. But the further northwest you are, the thicker the cloud will be, and that cloud giving a few spots of rain for mainly the higher parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland. It'll also be breezy towards the northwest, risk of gales at times for the Western Isles, but that breeze coming up from the south, so relatively mild temperatures in the double figures in most places. Then through Saturday night, a band of rain approaches from the northwest. That will push through during Sunday, weaken, and so for many places, Sunday is another fine day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I'm going to hand you over to Defence Minister James Heappey, who's answering questions in the Commons on Ukraine.
Borders from the Crimea and from ships in the Black Sea. As leaders around the free world have said, this is an outrage against international law, violating Ukrainian sovereignty, and brings a profound change to the security landscape in the Euro-Atlantic. Mr. Speaker, the Ukrainian armed forces have stood their ground heroically, forcing fierce fighting around several Ukrainian cities. The Antonov 2 airfield north of Kyiv was taken by Russian airborne forces as part of the initial assault yesterday morning, but has reportedly been retaken by Ukrainian forces overnight. As the world has now seen, the intelligence available to the British and American governments over recent weeks has proven to be entirely accurate, and this allows us to assess that the Russians have failed to achieve any of their planned objectives for the first day of combat operations. The Ukrainian armed forces claim to have shot down 6 fixed-wing aircraft and 7 helicopters. They report that 137 Ukrainian service personnel have been killed in action, as well as 57 civilians. Hundreds more have been injured. The Ukrainian government also reports that 450 Russian service personnel have been killed in action. Mr. Speaker, as a former soldier with the vivid experience of death on the battlefield seared forever in my mind, I take no satisfaction in reporting those numbers to the House, nor do I propose that we keep a score every day. These are the lives of innocent civilians, and they are lives of the bravest and the best of Russians and Ukrainians. As we gorge on the live footage of a peer-on-peer war being broadcast from a European capital, just 2.5 hours flying time from London, we should remember that behind these pictures of incredible fear and misery. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I'll also pay tribute this morning to the protesters in Moscow, St. Petersburg and other Russian cities who protested last night against this pointless loss of Russian life. President Putin and the kleptocrats that surround him have miscalculated badly. Young Russian men and women are needlessly losing their lives. The responsibility sits entirely with the Kremlin. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, British Royal Air Force Tornado jets took part in NATO air policing from their base in RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, from where they patrolled over the Black Sea and southeastern Europe. HMS Trent is part of already a NATO standing maritime group. There are further Royal Navy ships being deployed to other NATO standing groups, both in the Baltic and in the Eastern Mediterranean. In addition to the Royal Tank Regiment battle group that has been in place in Estonia for the last 6 months, the Royal Welsh battle group will be arriving in Estonia earlier than planned to double up our force levels, and those doubled up force levels remain indefinitely. They will be augmented by the headquarters of 12 Mechanised Brigade, meaning that the United Kingdom will have an armoured brigade in Estonia, reassuring one of our closest NATO allies. Mr. Speaker, as you've heard from the Secretary of State, the Prime Minister and others over recent days, we will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days. But we must all in this House be clear that British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become if people miscalculate and things escalate unnecessarily. The detail of the support the UK will provide to the Ukrainians at this very sensitive point in operations, Mr. Speaker, is not something I think the government feels it can share the detail of with the House. We apologise for that. We'll do our best to give the House as much as we can, but you'll appreciate that the detail is operationally sensitive, and I hope, Mr. Speaker, that that is acceptable to you. Finally, Mr. Speaker, you and front bench spokespeople from around the House have had briefings from Defence Intelligence. We'll make sure that that continues to happen so that on Privy Council terms, briefings can be received by those who need to have them. Colleagues were also given a briefing last night by Defence Intelligence, which I know colleagues around the House have found useful. We intend to keep up those briefings for as long as we feel that there are kinetic combat operations that warrant a daily update. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, there's been a number of cross-party briefings from the Foreign Secretary and the Defence Secretary, the next of which is this afternoon, where I will be joining the Foreign Secretary and a representative of the intelligence community to brief colleagues further.
Just to say, I've allowed this to run over. It's such an important matter, and quite rightly, I wanted to hear the Minister in full. And of course, the same will be extended to the opposition and the SNP spokesperson. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking the Minister for the Armed Forces for his detailed update? And I'd also like to congratulate my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for his leadership in this appalling crisis. Yesterday, President Putin, the Russian dictator, ordered a full-scale invasion of an independent, democratic state in the heart of Europe. The people of Ukraine at this very time are fighting for their homeland against a monstrous aggressor. We are seeing history repeat itself as a powerful country headed by a madman is extending its territorial boundaries, first by annexing regions of sovereign countries and then invading those countries. This, of course, is what happened in the 1930s and led to World War. I have the following 4 questions for the Minister, which are in support of our Ukrainian friends and in support of our Western democratic values. First, the Ukraine ambassador to the United Kingdom has asked for us and our allies to institute a no-fly zone over Ukraine. As the ambassador said, people are dying as we speak. This action will be a significant and a real help for the people of the Ukraine. Yesterday, when I asked the Prime Minister about this request, he indicated it was not ruled out. Could the Minister update the House on this request for help? Secondly, as far as the Minister can say, what additional military hardware are we providing as a practical support to the people of the Ukraine? Thirdly, what steps are being taken by NATO to reinforce its eastern flank? And fourthly, given that we are now in a situation worse than the Cold War, will we be increasing our spending on defence to reflect that reality? Mr. Speaker, may the prayers of this House and the thoughts of this House be with the people of Ukraine.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I firstly join the honourable gentleman in sending his prayers to the people of Ukraine. I know as I was watching last night some of the footage that was emerging, particularly from Kharkiv, of the artillery barrage, it just looked like hell on earth, and it was pretty hard not to say a prayer before you went to sleep. And thank God for the safety in which we were all sleeping last night compared to those in that city. Mr. Speaker, as you'll appreciate, a no-fly zone is somewhat difficult to implement in a hostile airspace against a peer adversary. We need to have our eyes wide open to the reality that in such an event, NATO jets would not possibly, but would most certainly probably come into a combat situation with Russian jets, and the risk of miscalculation and escalation and the triggering of Article 5 could not be understated in those circumstances. And particularly, Mr. Speaker, you'll appreciate that in the air domain, the risk of miscalculation is greater because things are happening at Mach 2, and there is no time for political calibration, and it is in the hands of pilots flying at well over the speed of sound. Mr. Speaker, no-fly zones come with all sorts of problems. I understand exactly why the Ukrainian ambassador is asking, but we need to be clear that that could well trigger an Article 5 moment, and we need to be clear-eyed about that reality in considering it. Mr. Speaker, I said in my answer to the original question that I don't propose to provide a commentary on the additional hardware that we will supply to the Ukrainian armed forces, nor the routes by which we would do so, if indeed, Mr. Speaker, we will. This is something that the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister are clear about in terms of the requirement. We know that other European countries are keen to do likewise. But obviously this has to be provided at a pace and through routes that the Ukrainian armed forces are able to absorb in order to minimise the risk of the cache simply being destroyed or overwhelmed by advancing Russian forces. NATO is taking huge measures, Mr. Speaker, to reinforce its eastern flank. I've outlined in my initial response what the UK has done. That is an effort that has been more than matched by our best friends in the world, in the United States, and other NATO countries are also rallying to the flag. NATO has had, for the last 10 years or so, a network of enhanced forward presence battle groups. The UK is in Estonia. Those are all being reinforced and new forward presence battle groups being put in place. If the aim of what is going on right now was not just territorial gain in Ukraine, but to push NATO away from Russia, President Putin is achieving precisely the opposite, Mr. Speaker, because NATO is drawing the line around NATO countries ever thicker and ever stronger. Mr. Speaker, it won't surprise the honourable gentleman one bit to know that in the MOD we are quickly considering whether the threat has changed and whether more money is required. No defence minister would ever say that there isn't, but that is a conversation that needs to happen within government. And if you'll allow, Mr. Speaker, and I think the honourable gentleman would agree, this isn't a retail moment of politics where an issue arises and a solution be offered within the news cycle and then everybody moves on to the next thing. This is something that will define our role in the world for the next 20 years, and we've got time to make the right decisions.
Shadow Secretary of State, John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole House appreciates your willingness to allow this urgent question and the manner in which the Minister is briefing the House and the way that his colleagues are prepared to keep the House informed in this very rapidly developing crisis. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, President Putin launched a war in Europe. He is invading and killing people in a sovereign country that Russia itself guaranteed to respect. His attack on Ukraine is an attack on democracy, a grave violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. And Putin will not stop at Ukraine. He wants to divide and weaken the West. He wants to re-establish Russian control over neighbouring countries. These are the actions of an imperialist and a dictator. And Britain has a long tradition of standing up to such tyrants. We believe in freedom, in democracy, in the rule of law, in the right of a country to decide its own future, and these are the very values that Ukrainians are fighting for now, in their country, and we must support their brave resistance in any way that we can. And yes, our thoughts are with the comrades and the families of those on both sides that have been killed in these first hours of fighting. Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday, the Prime Minister told the House the UK will be shortly providing a further package of military support to Ukraine. We understand the Minister's comments about detail, but has this further military assistance been provided? The Minister knows he has the Labour's full support for this. And he knows too that was announced and delivered before, the UK's short-range, handheld, anti-tank missiles are working well. And he knows that the Ukrainians need more of these urgently to defend Kiev and their other cities. So can he confirm that he is willing to go that bit further? The Minister just said Russia has failed to take any of its day one objectives. Which are the major objectives that it has failed to meet? And what is the government's assessment of why it has failed? Finally, Mr. Speaker, NATO leaders meet today. Does Britain support NATO's response force now being activated in full? What further contribution will the UK make to reinforcing NATO allies on the eastern flank? And when will the 1,000 UK troops on standby to help with humanitarian assistance be deployed? And finally, the Minister mentioned the doubling up of British forces in Estonia. When will these be deployed and in place? Mr. Speaker, we've taken peace and security in Europe for granted since the end of the Cold War. We can no longer do that. And I fear that we will be dealing with the consequences of this Russian invasion now for years to come.
Really sombre stuff there, actually, from within the House of Commons. As you heard there, the view is now that for far too long in the West and in this country, we have taken our security and our safety for granted in a way. And as you heard there, we can no longer do that. Our Homeland Security editor, Mark White, does join us now in the studio to give us the latest on Russia's attack on Ukraine. Mark, what's the update since we last spoke to you about an hour or so ago?
Well, we're still waiting to hear more detail, really, of what's going on in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, in terms of gunfire that was reported about an hour or two ago. There are reports suggesting that it may have been warning shots that were fired and not necessarily any direct fighting in Kiev. Regardless, it's clearly very concerning. Kiev this morning and overnight came under a barrage of missile attacks. There are apartment buildings that have been badly damaged. Pictures that the Reuters news agency has issued of those sites around Kiev itself. You can see the apartment buildings there. We're told that there have been a number of civilian casualties in the capital this morning. Now, you heard from James Heappey, the Armed Forces Minister, in a very sombre assessment of what is happening in Ukraine at the moment. He said that so far, according to the Ukrainian government, 137 Ukrainian military personnel have been killed. More than 50 civilians have been killed, and many, many more have been injured. He also spoke about the fact that the British government would be sending more in the way of military aid to Ukraine. Now, this is important because in recent weeks, the British government, along with the US in particular, have been supplying the Ukrainians with vital military equipment, including from Britain, these shoulder-launched anti-tank missiles. And already we're told by the Ukrainian military that those shoulder-launched missiles have been successful in taking down at least 2 Russian aircraft. So clearly, the Ukrainian military are grateful for that, at least, even though there are no British, American or any other NATO allies boots on the ground to help them directly with the fighting. But what James Heappey said he wouldn't do at this stage is go into any detail about how that additional military equipment might get to Ukraine. And this could be very difficult indeed, because clearly there are very difficult situations there on the border. It might be difficult to get that equipment across. And Russia, we believe, has dominance. I just want to draw your attention to these pictures that you're seeing at the moment now. These are British tanks and other military equipment going into Estonia. This is part of a very significant uptake in British military personnel. We're going to that area, to that country, that NATO ally. We are doubling our presence there in Estonia to almost 2,000 British military personnel there. And again, as I say, this is important because Baltic nations, NATO members, are understandably very concerned indeed at the situation and the full-scale invasion that is now unfolding in that neighbouring country of Ukraine. And so NATO is bolstering its presence. The UK, the US, other NATO allies sending more troops to NATO's eastern flank to help out there. So those British personnel, an additional 1,000 tanks, other vehicles, heavy equipment, 2 brigades, we're told, now in that area, and a command headquarters as well. You can see those British military vehicles there with the Union flag on the door of a number of these vehicles. So that is, direct troop involvement, not in Ukraine, but in those neighbouring Baltic countries. And the reason, again, that this is important is not just for the potential of any conflict in Ukraine to spill over the borders, but we are already starting to see a humanitarian crisis building. We're told by the Ukrainian authorities this morning that about 100,000 people have fled directly the fighting, many of those people starting to spill over the borders of Ukraine into neighbouring countries, including Romania and Poland. There are reception centres that have been set up to help these people coming over the borders. Our British military personnel are likely to be involved in efforts to deal with that situation if it intensifies as well. So very worrying developments, fast-moving developments across Ukraine. As I say, that gunfire reported in the capital, missile strikes on the Ukrainian capital and elsewhere across the country as Russia continues to try to advance.
Mark White, thank you very, very much. Mark, our Home Security editor there, just taking you through the very latest coming out of Ukraine. Obviously, it's a fast-moving, developing situation, but we want to go to some of your views now, GB Views at gbnews.uk, and it's fair to say they're coming in thick and fast.
Yeah.
We've had our head in the sand for far too long concerning Russia and China, and it will hurt us hard now. Great show. Thank you, Kevin.
Well, I mean, on that point that Kevin just made, I mean, we really do have to wonder, is it something within the Western psyche or the human psyche that actually we wait till things get to such a disastrous point until we do something? Because it has been a long-standing conversation. Remember under Trump when he raised concerns about Huawei and the involvement of China in our strategic infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And it's been a long-standing debate about Russian money flooding into London and actually what role that might play diplomatically.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it looks as though what the allegation lobbed over from Keir Starmer was that, you know, the Russians have been so involved with the Conservative Party. When you look at the list of donors, and then Boris Johnson lobbed back, well, hang on a minute, look at the Chinese Communist Party with relation to that. And then Keir Starmer stood up and went, now is a time for us to all come together. And he realised, well, hang on a minute, our two major political parties might be not in the pocket of, that's not fair to say at all, but certainly have very strong links to people who now could well be our enemies.
And the question about Nord Stream 2 and the kind of German energy supply, people have been raising concerns about that for a very long time, and actually we've had many opportunities over the last couple of decades to become energy independent, and we haven't chosen to do that. So why have we waited till the nth hour in order to wake up when actually we are facing a catastrophic loss of life?
We are indeed. And also, how long will it take us, as someone's just raised in the inbox now, to build up our defence spending? It's all very well and good. You heard Peter Byrne there, Mr. Peter Byrne, in the House of Commons talking about whether we're going to increase our defence budget. Obviously, we've seen to have reduced that, certainly reduced the manpower, put all our eggs in that big, scary nuclear basket. Well, now, hang on a minute, what do we do? Because it's all very well and good lobbing a load of money at it now, but, well, it could take a couple of years before you manage to build up your armed force, by which time Putin owns most of Eastern Europe.
And I think when it comes to building up your kind of military defence, this is not necessarily because you are going to go out and invade and intervene, but it's actually a sign of strength as a country, being authoritative, and in the event that you may have to do that, you would be prepared to do so. And I think it does seem that many of these questions, finally, perhaps too late, are finally being taken seriously.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, thank you very much. All of these views, there's a lot. You really do. It's a strange one, isn't it? Because I think this time last week, I can remember sitting here and, you know, reading the inbox, and Ukraine was not the biggest issue of the day at the time. It probably was if you were just reading the news agenda, but it certainly wasn't for you guys at home. And then now, I mean, goodness gracious me, you see what happened yesterday, obviously, and everything in my inbox now is Ukraine. Everything.
But just very quickly, this is obviously a huge international story, but we shouldn't necessarily allow that to to take over issues such as the cost of living crisis and
of course,
that do affect the material lives of people in this country. And we don't want politicians to avoid those difficult questions domestically as well.
Indeed. Keep those views coming in, as I've said, GB Views at gbnews.uk. But after the break, we'll continue to bring you the latest, obviously, on what's going on in Ukraine, and a couple more bits and bobs as well. It's not going to be entirely Ukraine. Don't worry. Stay with us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties. But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Well, good morning. It's 11:27. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Inaya Falarin-Iman on GB News. We're live on your TV, radio and online this morning.
Yes, Defence Minister James Heappey told MPs today that NATO troops must not enter Ukraine because of the risk of miscalculation, leading to an existential crisis. And we'll bring you more on that just in a moment. But we've got lots of GB views that we're going to be getting into.
Yeah, loads of them actually. We've not protected our country from harm. We've allowed thousands to enter this country illegally. We've treated them like babies in a lot of cases. Obviously, they're not necessarily truthful about their age, etc., etc., etc. This is a very long email, but it is from Kim, who's a regular emailer into the show. Thank you very much. Just really talking about the fact that, of course, you know, actually, really, do we have a responsibility for refugees when it comes to Ukraine? Do we have more of a responsibility to them than we did for the people of Afghanistan, for example? Less of a responsibility? That's the question that really got you going in the inbox just now. But Graham in Liverpool has also been in touch.
Yes, and he's mentioned that we need to get started on shale gas.
Absolutely.
Because it might offend some people that are environmentalists, for example, but it's clearly an important issue now about energy independence. And I do think that that is an important issue. I mean, we have to weigh up a lot of these things, and we talk about the green agenda, but actually if it means that forwarding this particular agenda means that actually we're going to be energy insecure and vulnerable to conflict on the world stage. And I think that we have to really revisit that.
Yeah, I agree. But we are going to be doing a bit of a whiz round as well about how various different elements of this crisis can affect us here at home. But yes, as I was saying before, Defence Minister James Heappey told MPs today that NATO troops must not enter Ukraine because of the risk of miscalculation, leading to an existential threat. Now, Heappey obviously added as well that the government will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days.
Bob Seeley is a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee who joins us now. Bob, I mean, what do you make of some of the suggestions that Peter Bone was making? Thank you for joining us this morning. Also, that not a no-fly zone, for example, over Ukraine, and there was seemingly some resistance to that idea.
Good morning to your viewers. I think a no-fly zone is a recipe for direct military confrontation with Russia that will kill tens of millions of people in Europe. So I'm not a huge supporter of that. No, I think that's true to say.
Do you think it would absolutely directly lead to that? Do you think that presumably within just a couple of days there'd be some kind of direct conflict between our Air Force and Russia's?
The Russians Putin has quite clearly said that anyone who gets involved will be threatened with nuclear weapons by the Russians, or by the Russian state. So doing anything that's going to lead to that is going to be a profoundly foolish thing to do. Tactical actions, pulling rabbits out of sort of tactical hats, is no substitute for long-term policy. And I'm afraid that's what we've got wrong, as indeed you were both saying before the break.
But we are now pushing forward sanctions, but this isn't the first time that Russia has been under sanctions, in the last 10 years. Is it really enough? There's been talk about, Russian money in the UK, and in many ways, Russia operates like a mafia. So does it really mind if it's being isolated internationally, really?
That's a very good question, and the problem with that, there are many facets to that question. So look, I'll try to rattle through them. Does he mind? No, because the more there is a direct confrontation between Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and the West, the easier it is for him to say to his people that the West is the enemy, that we must fight the West, that West is the mortal danger to Russia. So that plays into his hands. Since Crimea, we should have taken much more action in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine in 2014, but we allowed ourselves to pretend that these were separatists. No, they weren't. They were controlled by the Russian secret agencies, the GRU and the FSB, and we sort of knew that. But all that lovely Russian money flowing into the law firms and the cities was too tempting. So we have got to get real to the Russian threat now before it is too late. And what we now have to do is to understand that deterrence has failed. And we have to find a way of making deterrence work before he starts trying to grab bits of the Baltic republics.
Well, exactly that. You mentioned there that Vladimir Putin has threatened anyone who gets involved with nuclear war, essentially. Do you think he actually means it, though? Do you think that actually, if we did get involved now, that he would point his nukes towards London? Because is he not just maybe kind of trying to posture a bit to keep us out? Could we call his bluff?
Okay. Do you want to risk? Do you want to take that risk? Is my direct question to you. It is true to say there are two things that are true to say here, and this is a problem. It's understanding which is with any given time. Do the Russians threaten with the use of nuclear weapons? Yes, they did it throughout the Cold War. They did it in 2016 to Denmark, when Denmark agreed to participate in the sort of US nuclear shield. So the Russians regularly say, we've got nuclear weapons, we're big and tough, we're going to threaten you. It is an unfortunate part of their diplomacy. It's actually a pretty disgusting and immoral and repugnant thing to do. But for Ukraine, such is Putin's neuralgia, and I think in Ukraine he probably means it, and in Ukraine I would not be willing to take that risk, where I would take that risk and see him down elsewhere.
And Bob Seeley, just finally, I mean, do you think this has really been a wake-up call for many Western leaders? There has been accusations. I mean, a former Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, effectively said that we've been involved in a dangerous form of decadence to a speech to the Heritage Foundation last week. I mean, do you think that we've been asleep at the wheel, we've been navel-gazing, and this may well be a significant wake-up call for Western leaders?
Completely, but the problem is that the wake-up call came in 2007.
Yeah, okay.
He no longer recognised the unipolar post-Cold War world. The wake-up call came in when he invaded Georgia. The wake-up call came in 2014 when he annexed Ukraine. The wake-up call has been repeatedly waking us up, and I'm afraid to say we've repeatedly hit the snooze button.
Yes, well, look, Bob, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure it won't be the last time that we talk to you here on this show, given everything that's going on. Bob Seeley there is a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee who's just joined us there. Well, look, after the break, there's lots of different facets to what's going on with Russia, isn't there, at the moment? Uefa has now moved its final away from St. Petersburg, Champions League final. But how else will the sports world react to the Russian invasion of Ukraine? We asked commentator Ada McGee for those headlines.
It's 11:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Gunfire has been heard near the government quarter of the Ukrainian capital as Russia's invasion of the country intensifies. New images show the Ukrainian National Guard on the streets of Kiev this morning. Earlier, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said no one's planning to occupy Ukraine. Overnight, residents in the capital sheltered underground during missile strikes. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's told President Vladimir Zelensky the world is united in its horror. It says Russia banned British Airlines from landing at its airports or crossing its airspace. Speaking in the Commons earlier, Armed Forces Minister James Heappey says NATO troops must not enter Ukraine.
We will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days, but we must all in this House be clear that British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become if people miscalculate and things escalate unnecessarily.
Uefa has confirmed this season's Champions League final will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. Instead, it's moved to Paris. The Kremlin said it regrets the decision by European football's governing body. The showpiece event was set to be played at the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg on May the 28th. Here in the UK, rape victims are being continually and systematically failed by the criminal justice system, according to a joint report by the Crown Prosecution Service Inspectorate. A lack of cooperation between police and prosecutors and poor communication with victims is being blamed for cases taking an average of 2 years to come to trial. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by a public spending watchdog, despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. More at the top of the hour. It's back to Patrick and Inaya with To The Point in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's 11:39. It's just about to go, 11:39. Anyway, this is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Inaya Valery Morozov on GB News Live, on your TV and radio, and online this morning.
Yes, well, there are pictures now coming up on your screens from Kiev.
Yeah, live images that we can see there at the moment. Now, earlier on in the day, of course, you will remember air raid sirens were going off and shooting was heard near the government quarters. So we'll have to give you the latest on all of that. But yes, just to the right of the screen now. And you can see that, obviously, Kiev is just there for you to have a look at the moment. And essentially, we are expecting the Russians to make serious moves towards it and indeed further their imprint in it throughout the course of the day. But Ukraine is, of course, now under attack. But how will this impact energy prices and the already high cost of living that we are enduring here? Well, let's talk now to Phil Rush, founder and chief economist at Heteronomics, who is there. There he is. So what impact has Russia already felt, actually, from sanctions, etc., at the moment?
Well, Russia can be pretty relaxed about the force of the sanctions it's felt so far, especially the ones that have come from the UK. The individuals that we've chosen to target are not especially important to the Putin regime, with the ones that are kind of Putin's close friends, not really part of the whole London grad system. So for them, yeah, he's pretty happy if a bit of oligarch money comes back to Russia, and these sanctions are something that he can shrug off fairly easily. The one that does matter for him is the steps by Scholz earlier in the week to put approval of Nord Stream 2 on ice. That threatens a really strategic project for the Russian government, which was set to bypass Ukraine and feed a lot of gas into the European market. That is now being put on hold, and that is going to have significant consequences for the UK and rest of Europe the next few years.
I mean, we're already in a cost of living crisis. Energy prices are just skyrocketing, really. I mean, how will the UK energy prices be affected by the Russian offensive in Ukraine? And what impact may this have, and why, do you think?
Yeah, so because of the energy price cap that we run in the UK, it's something that you won't feel the force of until October. But there definitely is a real hit that's coming in October. Our forecast for UK inflation has gone up by almost 1.5 percentage points over the past 10 days or so. To put that into kind of more tangible terms, the cap's going up in April to £2,000, near enough. In October, it's now set to go up to nearly £3,000. The government's got its rebate of £200 that kicks in at the same time, which is a small offset to that blow. But the trouble is that without Nord Stream 2 coming on stream, next winter is looking really bleak for the energy market. Prices have doubled in the past month for contracts trading for next winter. So this is having a real impact when we look through into prices in 2023 and beyond. So we don't fall back meaningfully below the sort of 2,000-ish per year tariff that we're likely to be facing from April. And that in turn causes problems for the government's rebate scheme, because a year after you get that little £200 bonus from the government, they start taking it back from you at £40 a year when prices are still high. So the whole policy was calibrated on prices falling as Russian gas came on market, but it's not there. Prices don't fall. And unfortunately, the rebate doesn't quite work in the way that they were intending.
Yeah, and I mean, this year it's going to be increasing next year. I mean, is there any way that it can be turned around? I mean, obviously we do know when it comes to, building different, power plants and shale gas and all these types of things does take a number of months, if not years, to really get it to kick in action. But is there any way that it can really be turned around in order to prevent such a huge squeeze on ordinary people?
Unfortunately, this is the sort of stuff that takes years to operate. Strategic decisions have been made in the UK for decades in favour of moving away from coal, not bringing in new nuclear, such that we're beholden on the wind blowing for our wind farms. And when it doesn't, we need gas. But we've also failed to invest in any storage capacity. So whereas most of Europe might have a couple of months of storage capacity, we've got less than a week. We can't run any length of time at all without new gas coming in. And while the government might like to say that we don't get much gas directly from Russia, we get most of it from Norway and our own fields, our electricity supply, when that comes in to pick up the slack, that is coming from Europe through interconnectors. And that ties us intricately to what's going on with Russian gas prices in the European market. So unfortunately, we can't get away from it. We can't get planning approvals through in time to bring supply on stream. But all you can hope for is just to divert a bit of LNG supply from the likes of Qatar back here instead of China, which is part of the problem that we had last winter.
Well, Phil, thank you very much. Phil Rush there, founder and chief economist at Heteronomics. Just, I think, doing a very concise, very good job of summarising, really, exactly how vulnerable we are and how it's going to hit people in the pocket.
It's really coming to a head, isn't it? It's really coming to a head. Like, you really have to hold politicians accountable. I mean, we have had a Conservative government since 2010, and many of these questions have been raised by different people on different sides of the political spectrum for decades now. And it really seems to be coming to a head now as we come out of this pandemic.
Yes, indeed. Well, Russia obviously has also been in the headlines pretty much every day for something sporting related. UEFA is now moving the 2022 Champions League final away from St. Petersburg following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The decision was made at an emergency meeting of European football's governing body this morning. Now, Aidan McGee is a sports broadcaster and writer, and he joins us in the studio now. Thank you very much. Aidan, what do you make of this, then?
Look, Paris was, Patrick, a safe, honest, seasoned, low-risk venue change. Now, it held the World Cup final in 1998, so it goes back quite a long way. Just a year after it opened, France beating Brazil 3-0 to win their first World Cup. Then Euro 2016, more recently, Portugal beating France. But it hasn't held a Champions League final since 2006. That's when Arsenal were 1-0 up, went down to 10 men, and Barcelona won by 2 goals to 1. So it's not held it recently. Yes, they would have loved to come back to Wembley. They made so much money here in 2011 when Barcelona played Manchester United. They even shoehorned a way to come back 2 years later when Borussia Dortmund played Bayern Munich, because honestly, it was just commercialism everywhere, exploitation everywhere. They made in excess of £100 million on each final. So the problem with going back to Wembley, though, is that it's due to be here in 2 years' time. Yes, OK, you could say, well, why don't there's so many English clubs left in it? They could all conceivably get to the quarterfinals. Well, they probably almost certainly will, and the semi-finals. So why not play at the London Stadium? Why not play at Arsenal, at Tottenham? We've got loads of venues in this country equipped to have it, but I think Paris was a safe option. And the decision had to be made relatively quickly as well. I mean, some would say maybe wait until the semi-final, but there's a lot of logistical capacity to have to deal with, and I think they made the decision quite well. The executive committee was interested in this morning, 27 members. One of them was from the Russian FA, obviously, and from the Ukrainian FA. The Russian guy, Alexander Zhukov, he's also the chief executive of Gazprom, so I reckon they might have muted his gap on Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, exactly. But has Russia actually infiltrated places like UEFA as well, do you think so?
Oh, without doubt. I mean, look, it's the whole of football and sport more generally is up to its neck in Russian money. Russia has contributed very little inside the sporting arena in terms of achievement on the field of play or elsewhere. I can think of Daniel Medvedev winning the US Open last year in the tennis. Zenit St. Petersburg won the UEFA Cup back in 2008. Apart from that, you're not looking very much. In fact, the medals they have won in the Olympics have been stripped largely because of state-funded doping. But you look at Aeroflot, Manchester United, they're deep in there, £40 million a season. Now, don't get me wrong, Man United is commercially viable. They will replace that deal. UEFA itself, Gazprom, they actually sponsored the venue where the tournament, where each final is going to take place. They sponsor Schalke, who are, OK, they're in the second division in Germany at the moment, but they're a big club. They've got a capacity of around 53,000. They normally take place in the latter stages of at least the Europa League. So they're all over the place. You think of even wider sport and the amount of events that Russia has hosted, Sochi in the Winter Olympics. How on earth did it get that? You know, you've got Moscow in 2008 when Manchester United played Chelsea in the Champions League final. So it gets all these things, and also you've got clubs in England just run by Russian individuals, not just Roman Abramovich. You've got clubs elsewhere. Alicia Usmanov, it used to have an interest at Arsenal, now has an interest at Everton. You've got championship clubs owned by Russians. So they are absolutely everywhere. Their influence is like tentacles.
I mean, but is there a danger in us being a bit maybe contradictory? Because we have had the Winter Olympics, right now, in China, and some people felt that that was not necessarily the right approach. Is it some
World Cup in Qatar?
Well, exactly. So in a way, you know, when we live in an international world where there isn't universal democracy, we have to accept that when it comes to something that everybody enjoys, like sports, we have to make those kinds of compromises.
It's a really good point, because this is why sport should try where possible to stay out of politics. Because, okay, I know they're inextricably linked, they really are. But when you're inviting Uefa and FIFA and organisations like that, the IOC even, to become moral arbiters, it almost always ends in tears. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was in Qatar in 2010. I was doing Sam Allardyce's column for the News of the World, and my boss said, look, I'm not having a jolly for a week in the Ritz-Carlton in Doha. You're going to have to go to the local organising committee of Qatar and find out exactly what they're up to, because, you know, they're not going to win the award of the World Cup for a good 10 years yet, but it'd be interesting to see what they're doing. I went to see them, and they said, listen, Aidan, we've got no hope of winning this next tournament. This is 2010. We're just familiarising ourselves with the process. Here's some nice pictures. Put them in the paper on Sunday if you want. Feed those to your 10 million readers. That's how many we had. And then, unbelievably, 6 months later, it was awarded the Games. It was absolutely astonishing. I cannot believe that the Games is still going, the World Cup is still going ahead there later this year. It's disrupting the football season. None of the clubs or players are happy about it. But FIFA made their bed and they have to lie in it.
Well, indeed, yes, a bed full of cash. Anyway, thank you very much, Aidan. Great to have you on the show. As always, Aidan McGee there, who's been a sports broadcaster and writer for an exceptionally long period of time, certainly knows his onions when it comes to anything sport-related, really, so thank you very much for that. We're going to throw over now to some live pictures of Kiev. We showed you them before. That air raid siren appears to be off now, as far as I can hear anyway, and well, that's obviously the centre of Kiev there, and it doesn't appear to be any Russians there so far, so fingers crossed there haven't been too many developments on that. We are going to be bringing you the latest, of course, though, throughout the day on that. We've been hearing this morning, there's been an influx, actually, of people crossing from Ukraine into neighbouring countries.
Yes, earlier charities here in the UK urged the government to open its borders to the thousands of refugees fleeing Ukraine in the wake of Russia's incursion. And we have actually been asking many of our GB News viewers what they think about the possibility of accepting thousands of Ukrainian people, and there's been very mixed views on this. But we can hear from one Ukrainian who's made her way on foot into Romania.
I'm from Kiev. I traveled with my family to Western Ukraine just for vacation when it happened. So we decided yesterday that we want to leave the country because it's not clear what will be happening. I have a lot of my relatives in Kiev who are sitting in the bomb shelters right now because there is a bombing everywhere and people are afraid and scared. So we want to leave Ukraine right now, but I think that there is no possibility for men to leave. So we need to decide. I have a 5-year-old kid, and I have also my sister who has 2 kids. So we are really scared and don't know what will happen here.
Yeah, it must be scary. Right?
I mean, you know, this is the real human stories. 'Cause I think oftentimes the conversation can be very abstract in relation to Western foreign policy and the crisis. But in reality, we're talking about human lives that are being upended, destroyed, and families terrified.
Well, look, 100%. I actually felt very emotional today, and I'm sure a lot of you do, when I saw what had been going on overnight. It all felt a lot more real than it did, certainly, this time yesterday, I think. And just to think about, some of those footages, that footage, easy for me to say, of people waving goodbye to young children and going off to fight, of those Ukrainian men, of 13 of them, I believe there were, on Snake Island. I'm sure by now today you've seen the footage of this, or at least heard the audio of it, where Russian naval ship says essentially surrender or we'll shoot, and they don't surrender, and then they all unfortunately perish according to reports anyway. And you think, they've been told now, haven't they, citizens, ordinary citizens, to start making Molotov cocktails. They've said that anyone who's of fighting age can essentially fight in the military.
And we also have to remember, undoubtedly, Putin is trying to present himself as a strong individual, but there are conflicts within Russia. I mean, there's been protests in St. Petersburg of young people about what is going on right now. So we also have to remember that this is a clearly paranoid and fragile society that is acting as a bully on the world stage.
Indeed. Well, look, we'll finish with you, really. We'll want some views there. GB Views at gbnews.uk, and people getting in touch. Alistair's getting in touch, talking about former President Donald Trump. Why is Germany exposing their economy and thus the European economy to the vagaries of Russian intentions? And that's a point that is coming up time and time again in our inbox right here now.
Yeah.
You know, President Trump was trying to get NATO members, etc., to pay more money to itself, and he questioned the legitimacy or the thought, really, the logical nature behind Germany's gas decisions.
Yeah, and Mark says, bring them over. They are genuine refugees. And I do think that that's an interesting point, because there is a sense over the last few years that, you know, people that aren't necessarily genuine have been allowed to come here. And actually what it often means is that we miss those that are fleeing genuine conflict. And actually, I think it would be very hard to argue against many of the people are genuine refugees that are fleeing.
Well, that's it, isn't it? And basically, as well, a lot of people questioning Joe Biden's response to this. He doesn't necessarily always seem to be a man who's in control. And yeah, so it certainly is an issue now that everyone really is really starting to get very wound up about, because it does seem close, doesn't it? And I think it's that issue of where does Putin stop? Does he even stop? You know, is this a man who actually has lost the plot a bit? Has he always had these plans? He's been allowed, presumably, to put these plans together over the course of potentially even decades, and we seem to have wandered into every single one of them.
Well, staying defiant amongst the Russian offensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we wanted to leave you with one lady anyway, who's singing the national anthem while cleaning up rubble in Kiev. So let's just make sure we go to this video now. I think it's a nice way to sign off, isn't it?
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGiven. A fine Friday for most of us. Blue skies up and down the country for a good few hours. Most places dry, and lighter winds compared to recent days and weeks. That will certainly be a noticeable improvement, with high pressure ridging up from the southwest, weather front staying clear for the time being, and with these isobars a bit more spaced out across the country, it's looking like a decent day. Initially fairly breezy down the North Sea coast, that wind easing, and then light winds for the vast majority. Some